I'm going to talk today about migration, data migration, and also other validation about your migration with ORA2PG. We're going to talk about several things about validation. The first thing is validation of data type. Validation of all the objects you will have to migrate from your Oracle database. The validation of data, which is something new in ORA2PG, and the validation of the store procedures, which is something which take almost most of the time for your migration. I will not talk about validation, application validation, because this is something big, and it can be a conference by itself, so I will not talk about that. I have no time for that. So I have introduced me, but I'm Gilles Daold. I am the author of ORA2PG, and I'm also author of some other tools like PG Badger, PG Formatter, and etc. I work now with MigOps, which is a company that is providing services around PostgreSQL and migration from that other RDBMS to PostgreSQL. So if you want me to work on your migration, please contact MigOps. I will be pleased to help you to migrate to PostgreSQL, and accessory. It also helps the development of ORA2PG. It's also a celebration time because it's been 20 years now that I start to develop ORA2PG. It started in 2000 with a simple script to migrate data from Oracle to PostgreSQL database, and this script has evolved to be an application for migrate from Oracle to Postgres, and also now MySQL to Postgres. The first version was in May 2001. The new version is 23, and it's just a few weeks. So this was a lot of work to be able to have something which cover all the migration from Oracle to Postgres. And, well, thank you. This is almost the most complete tools to migrate from Oracle to Postgres. When I start to develop it in 2000, and I said that Oracle will replace Postgres, that Postgres will replace Oracle, I feel the loneliness. So now everyone wants to migrate to Postgres, and I'm happy to see that everyone also wants to use ORA2PG. And it is now widely used, and I have a lot of feedback and a lot of work to make it, to improve it constantly. So, honestly, ORA2PG is not very sexy because it's all at command line. All reports, most of the reports are in text format, and there is no graphical interface. So it's not very attractive for the users, but it is pretty good to do what you have to do, so try it. The terminal is not something impossible to use, so let's try it. Type some command with ORA2PG and you will see how it works. We can break the migration in 6 steps. The first step is analysis, the assessment to know exactly what what kind of effort you will have to include in your migration. This is a deep analysis. ORA2PG is pretty good to give you an assessment. You will have the number of days that it estimates for your migration, but it also always needs the point of view, a human point of view, because ORA2PG is a program, so it's pretty mechanics for its analysis. So you will have to have a look to the report and see if there is something that is false positive or is underestimated by ORA2PG. This is especially true if you have, for example, one package, one ORA package which is used in several schemas. ORA2PG will give you a number of days for each repeated package in each schema, which is a count that is false because you will just transform it, translate it one time. So you will have to do that by yourself to adjust the analysis of ORA2PG. The migration, honestly, ORA2PG is pretty good to migrate every object from your ORAC database, schema, data, store procedures. There is still manual work to be done on store procedure, but this is a good startup, and most of the code is translated. And of course, the application, there is always some work to do at the application side. Testing, this is the most important part of the migration. This is what we're going to talk today. You must test the migration by itself, but also all of the workflow you have with your database, like the batches and some other part of your architecture. Performances, which usually it's pretty good for performance when you migrate to Postgres, because there is some very good feature in Postgres, but it happens that some parts are slow in Postgres and must be rewritten. So you will have to have a look to this. Training, people are trained to work with Oracle or the DBMS, so they have also to be trained to Postgres. And support, of course, this is a database. If you use it in production, you may need support for your database. So testing is a key of the success for your migration. This is most of the time for your migration you will be spent in testing, and you have to test and test again. This is necessary to be sure that everything is running like you are expecting. I guess there is a unitary test already, but most of the time it's a good practice to take the migration and create some new unitary test. And what is also something that must be tested is the switch over to production. Just one test is not enough. You have to test it several times to be sure that everything will go in the right way when you will switch to production. Sorry. I forget to say that there is two things that have not changed in 20 years for ORA2PG. This is Perl. It is still written in Perl. The code used in 2000 is already working, so I have no decision to rewrite it in another language. And the other thing that has not evolved is my English, so sorry for that, and I apologize. So we have some feature in Ora2PG to test object. Almost all objects in Ora2PG, all objects migrated by Ora2PG are something from the standard SQL standard. So there is no problem to migrate any object like type, sequences, table index, constraints, etc. Everything can be migrated by Ora2PG. And the only part which is some different between Oracle and Postgres are package. Packages are exported as schema into Postgres, which allow to create the function inside this schema, which allow us to call the function with the prefix of the package name. DB links too. In PostgreSQL, we have two possibilities for DB links. There is DB links itself, which is an extension which allows to communicate with another PostgreSQL database. But most of the time in the migration, you have to communicate with another Oracle database that is not already migrated. So in the new Postgres database, you will have to communicate with it. And for that, we have the Oracle Foreign Data Wrapper, which is an extension to allow to communicate with Oracle. Synonyms also are something really usual on Oracle, but there is no equivalent in PostgreSQL. So most of the time they are not migrated because it corresponds to something that does not exist. But we can, if they need to be migrated, we can use view instead of synonyms to emulate the synonyms. This is quite the same thing. Most of the time, synonyms are used to access to another part of the, or to another schema of the database to see, to hide to the user the path to the object. So view are done for that, so this is not problematic. There is also another part which is jobs. There is no such object in Postgres. So there is some extensions that allow to create jobs like pgcron. There is also PG agent, and now there is also a new pgcron and PG agent are something useful for like to have some scheduling like cron. But PG, there is a new extension which is called PG DBMS job, which is equivalent to the DBMS job module, which allow to run asynchronous job and to schedule jobs just like the Oracle module. Another part important is to validate all your data type when you migrate the table from Oracle. There is no easy way to do that unless trying to import all the data into Postgres, all or a part of the data, which will return an error if you have the wrong data type. This is possible with Postgres, with Ora2PG to load a part of the data. So you can choose to import, let's say, 2,000 or 100,000 of a row into Postgres to validate that you have the right data type. If you have an error, you have to look what is the problem. Most of the time, the problem comes from the begin to numeric transformation. Actually, in Oracle, there is a data type which is called number, which correspond to integer, big int, or to numeric if there is a precision or scale. Most of the tools are, for easiness, I guess, are migrating those numbers without precision into numeric, which allow to import the data without error. The problem is that if you have most of the primary key are numbers, and if you transform this into numeric, you will have a performance issue. So the choice of Ora2PG is to import them as big int. So if this is a real numeric data field, data column, you will have an error when you insert a number with a decimal. So this will allow you to detect the data types that need to be changed. The raw data type is a special things in Oracle, and especially the raw with precision of 16 and 32, which can be translated into UUID in PostgreSQL. And Ora2PG will do that now automatically. So normally you will not have an issue with this import, but data import can be used to detect if this is really a raw data type that is not that doesn't need to be translated into UUID. Translation to Boolean 2 with Ora2PG, you can tell, let's say, any car 1 or varchar 1 will be translated into Boolean because in Oracle Boolean doesn't exist, so most of the time you have a column car 1 with yes or no inside it. So Ora2PG is able to make the transformation and translate it into Boolean. So during the data import, you will be sure that everything will be translated into 0 to 1 and not something else. Column varchar also in some with some encoding you could have some problem because the length, the maximum length of your varchar will be too small, and when you will answer data, it will make an error. So you will have to increase the length limit. The special case about data and timestamp. Actually, when you will import data, will not have any problem. So this is something that will be tested at application side. The problem is that Oracle is storing date with the timestamp internally. So when you export the data, Ora2PG will transform it into timestamp. But in your application, maybe you just have the date. So you will have to change the output to just get the date. So you can also make an alter column to change the data type to that. So in Ora2PG, now you have some action that can be used to test, to validate your data. There is the test action, which allow you to run several tests in the PostgreSQL database, and to be compared with the Oracle database. There is typically two connections, one on the Oracle database and the second on the Postgres database. And then each object are counted and compared. And if there is some difference, you will have some error reported. The count of objects are tables, so you will compare if we have the same number of tables into Oracle and into Postgres. Trigger, view, sequence, it also checks the last value for sequence to be sure that you will start at the same value when you will start your Postgres in production. User data type, if all of your user data type have been exported or not. External table. In Oracle, external table are the files. Ora2PG exports them into external foreign table with file foreign data wrapper. And Ora2PG also counts the number of functions, whatever is, if they are in a package or not. So package, function and procedure from package are counted and reported. There is also a count per table. This count per table concerns indexes, unique constraint, primary key, so it will count each object, each constraint, indexes, the null constraints too, and the default value, to be sure that you have exactly the same in Oracle and in Postgres. Identity column, two are scanned, trigger, partition, everything is counted. So normally, after running a test, you will have an exact report to the count of objects you have in Oracle and the one you have in Postgres. So if there is a difference, you have missed something in your export. I have some example. I think I will not click on the link because maybe I will lose the focus. So let's say at the end, if we have time, I will show you. But this is something, a text report, so it's not really pleasant. But what we want to know is Oracle Postgres the number of objects, the count, and if there is an error, point the table or the object which is in error. You have also an option to count the number of rows. During the test action, you can add the moment minus count row to enable the count of row in each table. So each time Ora2PG will scan an Oracle table and a Postgres table, it will count the row and make a difference to see if there is a problem. There is also, because this is useful to use the option minus count row when you first run the test action. But after that, if you have made some modification and re-import the data, you have now a new test count action which only counts the row in each table. So you will not do the object count again. Here is an example. Test row count, so you have the Oracle, the first link is the Oracle report. From Tabl-Actor with 200 lines. And the second link is the Postgres on Tabl-Actor, which have been migrated with also 200 lines. So here everything goes well, so we have the same number of line in each table. At the bottom of the screen, you have the error row counts, which is the error part. If there is if Ora2PG detect any error in the row count for the table, it will report the name of the table where the count is different and gives the difference. So this is useful when you have 100 of tables instead of listing everything. There is also an option to test view. This option is only to count the number of rows written by the view, not the data written by the view. the problem to test, to compare the data is to have a view that is ordering the data, which we don't know when we run the view. So this part, I think Ora2PG can detect if the view can has an order by clause in its definition, but we also have to detect if the column has the right correlation. So it's pretty complicated to know exactly if they will report the exact same data. But for the moment, it only reports the count, the row returned by the view. So you will need to run tests at application level to be sure that the view reports the exact same data for the moment. An example of view analysis. So this is the same. You have the Oracle line and the PostgreSQL line with the name of the view and the number of our line return. If you have an error, you will have at the end of the report the error and the view concerned by the error. Here everything goes well. The test of data, this is something new in the new version of Ora2PG, which is the 23. Before testing the data, what you have to do is to be sure of the time, the migration time that it will take to migrate all your data. This is important to know the cutoff of the production time you will need to migrate. So import all your data. You have several options to run the data migration in parallel with multiprocess, which allow you to test at what speed you can export all your data to Postgres. You have the minus upper P, which will export data in parallel from tables. So you will have, let's say, 4 tables in parallel to be exported. The minus J, yes, this is the number of process to write to Postgres, and the minus uppercase G is the number of Oracle process for one table. So you can, especially if you have a big table with a lot of belobs, you can use the minus upper G to export the data at high speed. So with using all these options, you can see at what speed you can export the data. Take care that this option use a lot of CPU. So take care of that when you run it. You can have some problem. There is also now the use of Oracle foreign data wrapper to export the data, which is very important when you are exporting bilobs, because until now, Ora2PG use an eternal escapement to transform a bilob into byte, which has some cost because it's done in Perl. So it's not very really performant, so we have to parallelize the maximum to have some speed. But now we can use the foreign data wrapper Oracle FDW to migrate tables with belobs, and with the addition of the minus upper G you have now the maximum of speed. This is really impressive, the gain of time to export tables with Belob, with the rack foreign data wrapper. There is also, after loading the data, there is also the creation of the index and constraint. If you run the creation in a single process, it will take a lot of time, especially if you have a lot of data. So you can, with ORA2PG, give all the creation DDL, index creation and constraint creation, into a file and use action load to import everything with the number of process you want to parallelize. So it is very useful, and you have to abuse of this action to parallelize the creation of an index. So Postgres also now have internal parallelization for index creation, so it helps too. You must also consider if you have a terabyte of data, this is problematic to import all data when you want to switch in production. So you must consider the data that are archived, and the data that are necessary to start the production immediately. So best is to separate the archive data, the dead data, that you can import either before or either after the switch to production, and it will shorten the cutoff window. With all of these options and the rack foreign data wrapper, I don't think you can find a tool that can import the data at the higher speeds than ORA2PG. You can try with any TL on anything you want. ORA2PG is now the best tool to import your data. It needs some training to find the right tuning to import the data, but it's really impressive. About data validation, there is an action which is called test data, which is used to check all values returned by Oracle and Postgres. They are extracted from the two RDBMS and compare one by one. If there is a difference, you will have a notification. So basically, it uses foreign data wrapper to compare, because the point is with foreign data wrapper, Oracle foreign data wrapper is already transforming the data exported from Oracle, so we can compare it with Postgres directly. But you can also use the ORA2PG connection, direct connection to Oracle to compare the data. You don't need to have the foreign data wrapper installed. You can also use a where clause to limit the number of data you want to test. Or if you have imported only a part of the data with a where clause, you can use it too with the test data. How it works? The principle is you have ORA2PG, which is connected to Oracle, to the Oracle instance. This instance can be on a local server or on the cloud or an Exadata, for example. And you can connect the other part of ORA2PG to the PostgreSQL destination database. And everything will be extracted by ORA2PG and compared inside ORA2PG. There is some limitation and some prerequisite for running this test. you have to make sure that you have the corresponding data type between Oracle and Postgres. You cannot create your own table on Postgres with your own data type and wish that everything will go well with this test. So you have to create the data types that match between Oracle and Postgres if you don't use Ora2PG. Ora2PG will use the correct data type. You also need to have a primary key on the table to be checked. With this primary key or unique index is used to apply an order by clause, which is important to be able to compare the same things between the two databases. This can be avoided if you have imported. This is just the fourth time you have imported the data in single process, because in PostgreSQL, when you import the data, they are in the same order than the one in Oracle. But once there is a modification, the order will not be the same. So we need an order by clause. The collation, if you have a non-numeric key, primary key on this table, it has to be to have the collection C in PostgreSQL to have the right, to have the same sort order. And of course, there must be no modification of the data. The data validation will be exported to a file which is called data validation.log. It is stored in the current directory, but you can change also the output directory with the -B option. By default, it reports 10 errors and stops to compile the data. This is a nonsense to continue to scan the table if there is a certain number of errors. So 10 is the default. You can adjust this with a parameter. But after 10 errors, Ora2PG will switch to the next table. And data validation, yes, can be parallelized using the -P option, which is useful if you have a lot of table and you want to compare a lot of data. By default, Ora2PG will scan 10,000 of rows per table, so it's enough to be able to see if there is a problem. But you can also change this and force Ora2PG to scan all options, all rows. With this configuration directive to control this is called data validation rows. You have also one directive which is called FDW server, which allow you to give a name to the foreign data wrapper you want to use, foreign server you want to use. You don't have to create it. It will be created directly by Ora2PG if you set a name to this directive. PG-DSN is to set the communication to Postgres. And I told you about the 10 error by default. It can be controlled too by a configuration directive which is called data validation error, where you can set to 100 if you want. Parallel tables, yes.
In regards to the sampling, you said 10,000 rows. Is that random or is it sequential?
This is sequential.
Okay.
It is in the order of the select, with the order by, so in ascendant. I have planned to add 10,000 rows ascendant and 10,000 rows descendant. I think it's enough to have something, but we cannot use a sample table from Oracle and Postgres, I don't think they will report the exact same row. So.
Yeah, you don't have an algorithm for ordering randomly samples.
Yeah, this is the reason.
Yeah. Also, with the FDW approach, you would want to kind of avoid like taking the data from Oracle and Postgres and then doing that in a separate box. Rather, you're trying to do only a pull and compare. So that's kind of a reduction in terms of, like, it improves the performance of validation and migration too, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So parallel tables, this is the minus P option, which allow you to compare multiple tables at the same time. You will gain time. Data validation ordering, this is the configuration directives that allow you to enable or disable the order by clause in the select. So if you have imported all the data the first time and there is no modification, the data are in the same order. So you will be able to scan any table without a primary key and without the need of another by clause. So, because data are in the same order of the select. But it needs to have been imported in a single process, because if you have multi-process, the same, so the row will be mixed. So in this case, you can use data validation ordering set to 0, and it will scan all the table, whatever if it has a primary key or not. The limits for the data validation, so you can only run data validation schema by schema. You cannot have multiple schema from a rack compared to multiple schema scan in PG. This is not possible. You have to choose one schema by one schema one schema to be able to run the test. There is actually a limitation with user-defined data type. You cannot compare a table which have a user-defined data type because the rack foreign data wrapper does not allow it. This is a limitation, but I'm working on a solution with a direct connection to be able to compare both table with user-defined data type. Same for the partition. You cannot work partition by partition, which is a bit limited because if you export only 10,000 of row from a partitional table, you will probably have a very not representative sample. So. And there is no data validation for view. Ora2PG allow you to change the structure between the ORAC database and the Postgres database. So when you export your object from the ORAC database, you can also report the same change when you will run the test. So you can rename the schema, you can rename a table, you can rename columns, you can drop columns between ORAC and Postgres. Everything will be, all the information will be stored in the ora2pg.conf, which is the configuration file. Here are the configuration directives used to perform this action. So it's pretty simple to configure a structure change between Oracle to Postgres in Ora2PG. If you want to compare the data, you have to have the same configuration files that you used when you migrate the object. So, and everything will go fine. you can try to do this with other tools that allow migration of Oracle to Postgres. Most of the time you will spend a lot of time to try to configure a JSON file or something like that to try to define the transformation you want between Oracle and Postgres. But with Oracle PG, this is very simple. This is not very modern. This is pretty old. This is a simple text file, but it works pretty well. So. Same if you have data type transformation, like transform some columns into Boolean or some types into Booleans, or you have some configuration directives that allow you to change the data type between Oracle and Postgres. For replace as Boolean, so you can just give a char 1, and any column defined in char 1 will be transformed in Boolean into Postgres. And the data stored into this column will be also transformed into Boolean. You can also remap some data type like the date data type which is exported in timestamp. You just set that to that, and you will have that data type in Postgres. Store procedures. This is probably most of the time. I already said that. Postgres only checks your store procedure at execution time. So you will see the error only when you will execute the store procedure. So it's good to run an extension which is called PGSQL check, which analyzes the code in your store procedures, and you will have something more sure to be executed on Postgres. There is some other side, but I'm thinking.
Okay. Yeah.
You said before that Oracle PG was the fastest way to move data, right, if I understood it correctly. How fast is it today? So assuming that I have two systems on the same backplane, so there's no network effect, how fast can I move data from Aura to PG today?
It really depends of the... Actually, I used to say that you can migrate before the Oracle foreign data wrapper integration. You can migrate 100 gigabytes of data in 1 hour. Actually, with the foreign data wrapper, most of the database size are BLOBs. This is why I talk about this part with Oracle foreign data wrapper. For other data types, this is not problematic. This is as fast as possible. But for the BLOBs, 2 byte with the foreign data wrapper, no, I think the 100 of gigabytes, you can migrate this in 20 minutes, something like that. Yeah, this is really, really fast. And the more you can parallelize, if you can use 32 CPU to execute Oracle PG, then you can split the data into 32 processes, and it will be very, very fast. It depends on your server when you run Oracle PG.
My question concerns the PLPGSQL or PL SQL modules that you're converting, a lot of times they have collections in them, like PL SQL tables, which are in-memory things. Is there anything in Ora2PG to handle those? And if so, how do you do it?
No, Ora2PG don't have this information when he pass the PL SQL file. Only he have the information about the other store procedures that exist, so he can replace their call in the store procedure. But for tables, no. This is why I recommend to run PSQL check, because he will check that all your calls in the translated code correspond to existing objects. If he found some code that call an non-existent table, it will give you a warning, tell you this call, the table is missing, or the function is missing, or something like that.
Okay, any more questions? Yeah.
This is a strange question because someone asked, right? They have 2 copies of the same Postgres database and they're trying to figure out the difference between the data. Is there a way of doing it? Because you're validating from Oracle to Postgres. I'm just wondering if there's a way to do it for more databases.
To load data in 2 different databases?
No. For some reason, they have another copy of the same Postgres database and they're trying to diff the data. Not the structure, but the difference in the data.
Between 2 Postgres databases?
Yeah.
No, Ora2PG doesn't compare to Postgres. It could be done, but this is not the goal of Ora2PG.
For what it's worth, I had a bit of a puzzle the same as you. And what I ended up doing was I would use the same exact query, but then I'd generate the... Okay, so let's suppose you have 2 databases or 2 tables. Execute a query, the same query, in order, but instead of outputting the data, throw it through an MD checksum and just compare that.
Yeah. You can use a simple script, Perl script to do the thing. You just connect the to handle to the 2 database and make a checksum for each row and compare it. This is pretty easy to do.
Each database is 2 terabytes?
Yes, it will take time, yeah.
Checksum, do the checksum.
You want to use parallelism from Ora2PG, yeah. It could be this. I think this is not complicated to do because I have I can do that with MySQL and Oracle, and there is a possibility to do that with other SGBD. So it just needs to be implemented. But maybe there is already tools that do that. I know we are also working on some tools that can count rows and compare rows independently from Ora2PG. So maybe.
Yeah, I think in the interest of time for the next speaker, like we will try to stop the questions maybe here. But
thanks for your patience.
Thank you so much. It was a great talk.